Welcome to today's episode of A Class Act. We're diving into one of the most important leadership topics of our time: how to build AI into the very DNA of an organisation. Join me is Eddie Short, a seasoned leader in digital transformation and AI, who's worked to the intersection of technology, data, and strategy for decades. Eddie has helped private equity-backed firms and global corporates with AI, not as a bolt-on, but as a co-driver of reinvention and enterprise value. Eddie, great to have you in the show. Thanks very much for joining me.
Delighted to be here, Michael. Yeah, and live true.
No,
I'm
not
picking
at all.
myself up.
No, really happy to get you on the show. Just
But,
for for the audience listening, Eddie spoke at our last Data Impact Leadership Forum based in Edinburgh. So a lot of the questions today are based on the back of his presentation and the conversations I've had with Eddie. So no, really looking forward to it. So let's just start with your background. You have had a fascinating journey across consulting, transformation, and now shaping AI strategy. Can you walk us through your story and how you came to specialise in building AI into business models?
yeah, no, I think it goes back a long time. I started my journey in computing at school in the early 80s. I suppose my first AI was when I was doing my master's degree in chemical engineering. I actually built what we call a fourth generation AI, an expert system to design distillation columns. And I ended up in the oil business. And through oil, I ended up through a graduate training program
Yeah,
with Mobile Oil in IT. And from IT, I ended up finding myself that if I wanted to get involved in big programs, I needed to go into consulting. So I ended up at KPMG, lived through the first dot-com era, tried to do some things, didn't make any money. I found myself at Ernst & Young just as it was being acquired by Capgemini, the consulting business. And I actually started building my data business,
yeah,
Practice X. So I was a technology guy or technology strategy guy working at EY Management Consulting and became a Capgemini guy and built basically Capgemini's practice through the noughties and became the UK and global leader of what I called at the time business information
yeah,
management, now would be called data and analytics. And we built systems for data and we built them for like people called CIOs. And the bizarre thing was, I always thought at the time was like, we're the information guys, we're the
yeah,
people turning data into information. And these CIO characters are actually doing systems, ERP, CRM, supply chain management, but they're not actually doing an awful lot on data. I built Capgemini's, what would now be called data
yeah,
and analytics practice in the noughties, and we were building, I would call them, yeah, now you call them data platforms. And I always thought, really, we're the people turning data into information. And I think this is a paradox with data. It's like data itself is of no use whatsoever. It's only when you turn it into something useful, information, that then you can, then it has value. At that point, my career bifurcated. I
yeah,
could have actually gone and been a CEO of a data business, but I thought I want to really turn this into how do we deliver value. So I actually spent 3 years at BAT, British American Tobacco, never smoked in my life, but I was part of
yeah,
their global business services leadership team. And I actually did a £100 million transformation to help them basically run a global business, go from being a multinational to being a global business, implementing we now call data and analytics in marketing, supply chain operations, HR, finance, to run a global business. That was probably a seminal moment for me. And then what do you do after that? It's like
yeah,
I went back to consulting, and they say more business consulting back at KPMG as a partner leading their EMEA, now data and analytics practice. And I think it changed the game. We were focusing then about risk, more risk, more compliance. The chief data officer, as we now know it, had emerged. And I'm still looking at this kind of paradox there as saying risk and performance, two sides of the same data. Whereas actually what I've seen is bring my Capgemini experience together.
yeah,
People were not architecting things effectively. They were seeing it as parallel processes, parallel universes. And actually, if you look at a bank or a retailer, the data you need for risk and compliance is the same data you
yeah,
need to actually sell to people effectively. And if you treat them as parallel processes and parallel universes, you end up with more complexity. And I want to architect things. And I'd already created a concept
yeah,
called the intelligent enterprise, which I looked at as saying we build companies around people, process, and technology, but largely that's process and technology. Process drives technology, technology drives process, and people typically are the business case. And I'd built my business before about building reporting and data migration is looking at the architecture. So I created this concept of putting data in the middle
yeah,
because data serves people to make decisions. And actually data is the
yeah.
fuel to run process and technology. And having spent a few years at KPMG, I spent 3 years then as a
That's
CDAO
right.
globally for Aon. and then went to Telefonica and set up my own business. And it kind of another kind of milestone moment. I was brought in to do a strategy for the O2 business in the UK, sort of 7 or 8 billion business, 30 million customers. And you think about telecoms as having a lot of data and being great at data. The reality is they had a lot of data. They weren't great at it. I presented a strategy to the CEO, a guy called Mark Evans, and he said, "Great, Eddie, great strategy. But in the time 7 years I've been here as CFO and CEO, I've had 5 of them. They've all failed. What's different and better than about yours?" I said, "Well, did it, done it, haven't." Yeah, but he said, "You're a consultant." And so they basically persuaded me to join them, put my money where my mouth is, and spent the next 3 years after that building, I would say, transforming marketing, sales, and service. So it's not really delivering data and analytics, it's transforming marketing, sales, and service. And in the end, started to get into transforming how you design telecoms networks, because actually telecoms networks design is a data science and radio engineering problem. And what you find looking at transforming marketing, sales, and service, and suddenly telecom networks, it's always data plus analytics plus marketing plus engineering. Not, yeah, people do sell data, but real data monetization is that kind of 1 + 1 = 3, or combine 2 processes with data, you get 1 + 1 times 2 times 3. Suddenly you've got 7 or 8, you've got big multipliers. And that's basically been my lesson. It's all about value creation. And having done the transformation at O2, where we basically put 100 million on the bottom line and the top line, I went into private equity. And what's through my journey in private equity over the last 4 or 5 years, what I found is that I'm helping to build, you'd say people bring me in to do digital AI data strategies, but then I find that actually, well, you want to build a data strategy? No, you don't really. You need a business strategy that's data enabled and AI powered, I call it. Then I find realities in many companies that I go to, they have a vision and a mission, they've got a financial plan, they don't have a strategy. And it's quite shocking. But company after company, organization after organization I go to, and I've taken my intelligent enterprise thing a bit further now and say, well, to be good at data, what you want to do is use data and AI to supercharge the capabilities that will allow you to win in the market. So many companies can't describe what those capabilities are. So I actually find myself actually helping them to write a strategy that is a business strategy that's data enabled and AI powered, because they'll say, you want to be great at marketing, or you want to be great at supply chain, or you want to be great at customer service, right? That's going to help you win in the market, right? Well, then supercharge that with data and AI. And then suddenly you've got a business flywheel that you would give more confident. And ultimately, that is to build, I've called it a forward-looking predictive by design model that allows you to continually optimize that. And that's got to be humans powered by data analytics and supported and enabled by AI. And that's the journey I've been on. Ultimately now it's about building higher performing, faster moving, more profitable, more effective business.
I'm looking forward to hearing more about it through the podcast as well. And looking back, what were some of the pivotal projects or experiences that shaped your views in AI as more than just a technology, but something that fundamentally changes how organizations work?
Yeah, well, so I think Telefonica O2 is a great example. So we're looking at how you transform marketing, sales, and service. So they have lots of different, as they call them, channels. They've got retail stores, they've got voice channels, and not surprisingly, telephone. But actually, you find out you've got 30 different channels. You interact with people on TikTok and Facebook and social media and email and YouTube and 30 channels. Then you find actually customers go through journeys. They don't follow. So you articulate things in how does a customer discover us? How do they buy from us? How do we support them? And we think of it in a linear, unidirectional process. But actually, customers go through journeys like this, and they hop across different channels. Even if you're a digital business, you've probably got multiple different channels that you're operating. They're all digital channels, but they're different ones. And can you intercept them? And you suddenly find, if you try to document that in an old school process mapping way, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of different journeys. You could spend forever trying to document them. What you've actually got are activities, and you've got data, and you suddenly start to need a machine to help you work out what's the optimum next best offer or action at any particular time or place. And if you don't know that, and you can't intercept that, then you're going to be inefficient. And so what I've learned from that, I already knew, but we basically proved it, was we basically need to have activities that we can orchestrate and continually optimize. And with all the love in the world, a human's just not able to do that. They need to set the goals. They need to track the outputs. They need to basically get the guidance on the machine at the end of the output and the beginning, but they can't do it on
No,
their own.
definitely.
That's a seminal moment.
Yep.
I think what I've also seen, and you see now, is dealing with large volumes of data and things like natural language processing. Machines have been very good at understanding language. And what I would say that's been a seminal thing, you look at contact centers and customer service, and the UK, everybody says they would like to speak to a human. And if it's a kind of, would you prefer to speak to a human machine? Oh, I speak to a human. But when you look at our work in the UK, the brutal reality is most of our
Yeah,
customer
definitely.
experience has been dehumanized. The lowest cost locations, often offshore, or it's the lowest cost technology solution, it gives you a bad service. Now, over the last few years, and particularly I think since 2017, 2018, the technology has been transformed in terms of how a machine can understand human language and translate that. And you find that a good contact center can ingest your knowledge of how you interact with customers, your knowledge of all the questions they've got, your experience, and actually respond in multiple different languages simultaneously and give a response. Now, we hear
Yeah,
with AI about hallucinations, but in a controlled environment like that, you just need 3 agents. You need one that's got all the questions we've ever asked, one that's got all the answers we've ever given in all the different formats, which could be voice, video, and you get them to talk to each other. And you have a third agent, which basically is then
yeah,
pulling out the hallucinations, and you train it that way. And then you end with something like a fairly dull, boring utility like Octopus Energy, which is now the leading utility in the UK, can suddenly have most of its customer service done by an agent, gives a higher net promoter score, higher customer experience scores, but they still use humans in the loop where you need a human. And those humans, because they're dealing with high quality things, they've got a better experience, they've got more flexibility. So it's that kind of balancing of humans and machines. And that's, I would say, is another. It's a speed
definitely.
and flexibility.
Obviously, you've been in this space for a while, and you must have a passion being in this for this long. So what is it about like AI and enterprise transformation that really keeps you motivated?
So for me, as I always say,
Yeah,
it's not the technology, it's what you do with it. And I genuinely believe this is we're on now entering
yeah,
is a truly
definitely.
new industrial revolution. Whether it's the fourth or the fifth one, but this is happening in years, not decades and centuries. And what I've found is the methodology around this is it's if you're not in the actual business of producing algorithms, it's actually 10%
Yeah,
AI. It's 20% data and tech to enable that AI, but it's actually 70% of the work is
definitely.
changing how people work. That's not to be confused with traditional change management, which is still important. Training and communication is key, but we're talking about
Yeah,
changing the way people work. And that means, and what you also see is that probably, and I look at this, spectators come at the top of organizations. We will break down functional hierarchies. The C level are probably very poorly educated. But it's also culture and behavior. And I think the UK is a great place and a great paradox. We are some of the earliest and deepest adopters of
hmm,
AI and digital technology at home. You know, we've got one of the
yeah,
highest penetration of mobile phones, online shopping, online deliveries and food, and yet intense resistance in a business work environment to using this technology.
uh-huh.
It's like it's going to take my job. It's going to. It's like, the reality is, as a passionate British person, is kind of we've got great capabilities, but we've got to learn
Yeah,
to change and adopt them. That's my passion is about really looking at our competitiveness and our opportunities. And I'll give you a great quote for me. It's like saying, because I've worked all around Europe and worldwide, the nation of shopkeepers, right? Our biggest retailer is
yeah,
now something like number 25 in the world. That's our big,
hmm,
25 years ago, they were number 3 retailer in the world. And that's the nation of shopkeepers. We don't have any, all of our big banks, we had 3 or 4 in the top 10 prior to the financial crisis. And the only one that's left, which is not really a British bank, is HSBC's Chinese bank that happens. So these are the businesses that we've been doing out for decades and centuries. And so I'm passionate about the fact that we should be able to bring new industries, and our innovation is great. And this is at the cusp of it. We've got great universities and building this, but we've got to harness this to drive the economy.
no, definitely. And you always talk about like leadership and working with people. in the kind of C-suite and exec teams as well. Has there been any leaders or mentors who shaped your approach to transformation in the way you possibly think about AI today?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite bosses, when I first made it onto an exec team for Capgemini in the UK, my boss was a guy called Nigel Kirby-Green. And after 6 months in the role, he said, yeah, as part of a leadership team of 6 people, he said, Eddie, I brought you on because of your innovation and challenge. He said, be aware that the other members of the leadership team find you to be annoying and an annoying git. He said, actually, part of your annoying git character is why I brought you on to that. But yeah, sometimes you need to soften that. But what I've also found is like I am the person and call it the emperor's new clothes. I point out, and people don't often people don't like it. It has been my honesty has been sometimes to my detriment. Whereas because British people are not like Dutch people and it's kind of matter of fact. But I have had a uncanny knack of being able to find out where there are problems and where you could do things differently. Don't ask me to run something. I bet it would be a terrible CEO. But in terms of seeing an opportunity of how you can really drive a step change improvement, that's what I'm like a dog with a bone. And I think you have to be that. So I'm not necessarily the inventor. I'm not the person who runs it, but I am a kind of change agent. And I think that's what I think is at the pivot of what we need to do now. Because and through my career, it's like say in the old world that we used to operate, you used to have the C-level, the CEO. They ran the business, and they typically that's why consulting took off. They brought in people to help them change the business. Now we're in an environment where I would call it the one constant is change as usual. And so you need a few more annoying gits out there who are constantly agitating.
And it's a rare breed as well. And from what I'm seeing, businesses are really needing people who can come in and really kind of move the needle and get things done in organisation, and just not just as doing what they used to do and keeping it going that way. And definitely,
Yeah,
and even some of the kind of businesses I'm working with across, like, yeah,
yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I think it's like
yeah,
I mentioned Nigel, but I'd say
yeah,
Mark Evans. I work for at Telefonica. And Mark, we merged to form Virgin Media O2. He didn't become the CEO of Virgin Media O2, went to another guy, Lutz Schuler. But we had a chat at the end of it. And he said, I mentioned the fact that
yeah.
I outlasted him. So he'd had 5 people doing data in 7 years, and 3 years later, I was still there. But he said to me, Eddie, you're the only person on my
Yeah,
leadership
brilliant.
team who ever told me I was wrong. And he said, you didn't do that in a bad way. He said, once or twice you did it in front of other people, which can be a bit painful. But he said, you always had a good idea. He said, well,
Yeah.
everybody else would used to go, yes, Mark, took their thought, yes, what do you want to do? Yeah, we'll do it. And he
Mm.
said, I need a bit more of that
We'll send the podcast.
challenge.
From our conversations through speaking to you, you stress that AI cannot just be bolted on, it has to be built in. Can you unpack that for us? Like, what does AI in the DNA look like in practice?
That's pivotal. And I think we find this kind of oil and water mentality of human intelligence versus machine intelligence, and will machine intelligence replace human intelligence? The reality is, I don't really see this kind of mega brain AI appearing anytime soon that can actually think like a human. But actually, the reality is, in certain activities, can already outperform humans, and that's been true with automation since the dawn. You know, say the looms and what have you basically replaced hundreds of thousands of workers. The tractor replaced hundreds of thousands of people in agriculture. And now we've got things doing the kind of a lot of what we call the knowledge work, and it's so there is that paradigm. But what I would say is in the model that I believe in is human and machine intelligence working together. And when you're looking at how we design companies, and I mentioned the thing about that Telefonica O2 omni-channel decisioning across, you've got to get into the construct of the company. And what you find with this people, process, and technology model is that we are designing companies in a manufacturing construct. Now, if you look at the UK economy, 90% of our economy, if you include the public sector
Yeah,
and healthcare, is a service industry.
yeah.
10% of our economy is manufacturing. And yet we're still using a construct of, call it
Mm.
scalable 19th century manufacturing. We have actually activities that we do that we need to orchestrate, and some of them need to be decisions made by humans, and some of them need human creativity, but some of them can be, you say, continually
Yeah,
optimized, and machines are brilliant at that. But you've got to then get it into your DNA. If you try to just stick on AI on the side, so Don't want to detriment certain vendors, but you said about we're all using Copilot or Gemini. Sorry, we're using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini at home for personal productivity. The same benefits have not been accrued by CTOs and CEOs deploying Copilots because it's trying to do generic stuff across the organization. Yeah, we can record all of our meetings. Great, fantastic. We're not applying it to business problems which actually change the way people work. And that's why I come back to it. We're not just reskilling people, we're changing the nature of work. And that means the DNA of the organization, how we behave, how we're structured, and really looking into the nitty gritty of the capabilities that will allow us to win in the market. And the easiest example I give you is like Jeff Bezos, when he reinvented Amazon in 2001, post.com crash, he looked at all these best practice things of flywheels and what have you, and he said we need to be world class at marketing. And their flywheel is all based on the fact we want to be the world class marketing people. We're going to attract customers. We're going to know more about those customers. That's going to bring us more suppliers. We're going to bring more products. That's going to we're going to give more services to our customers, and that's going to bring more customers. That'll bring more suppliers who then compete with each other to drive more prices. And you're going to get faster and faster. And everything that they've built, AWS, etc., came from that kind of vision. And if you can't describe what you need to be good at, how can you describe where it's like we always do this and oh yeah, we just need to do a use case. I'm sorry, use cases is again pre-2020 thinking.
That leads on to the next question round about like today's business operating models are backward looking by design, and what are the signs leadership should watch out for that show they're still sick, they're still kind of stuck in the old paradigm.
Well, that gets the nitty gritty of where we had the
Yeah.
conversation about intelligent enterprise and companies. So today that people process technology, process drives technology, you get some data out of it. In most of your chief data officer functions, they're looking at their output exhaust data, and they spend millions of pounds in many sense to put Humpty Dumpty back together again to tell you what happened and try and then build some models on that. Computing from when I first learned it in the 80s, it's like input, process, output. The input is data, the output is data, feedback loop, that's machine learning. And if you put that in business terms, your output is your revenue, EBITDA, costs. Your input is like, all right, that's customer experience, that's brand, that's all right. How do we how are we going to? So there's input KPIs and output KPIs, and if we're focusing on the input, what I find is if you only got control of the output, the reality is the de facto is finance control the organization. If you got inputs, it means the rest of the organization can say these are the ways that we can drive our processes, deliver the outcomes, and we're building a predictive by design model. And if you're then the chief marketing officer, chief sales, chief operation officer, you can go to the CFO and the CEO and say, look, this is our primary scenario. With these, we've got line of sight from these KPIs delivering this revenue on this cost. By the way we can operate, we've already got 3 scenarios in the background. And if actually something goes wrong on scenario A, customers disappear, market changes, you've got scenario B, and that'll deliver the same outcome. Worst case scenario, we've got C or D, which might deliver a slightly lesser outcome from what we know today, but it gets us to that. It is constantly evolving. It's driving the business forward. When I look at, again, the economy and the people we find ourselves, we got that risk controlling dominated by finance. We as a country and economy, we've gone from, in my career, risk management to risk avoidance. When you're only avoiding risk, you always come down to lowest cost control. If you can build that predictive model, your other C-level leaders have given you confidence, giving them the insights that they can go forward. We're looking through the forward looking as opposed to the rear view mirror. And I'm confident I'm going to deliver that revenue. I'm going to deliver that profitability. And I've got some options to take me around it. Then you get to a predictive by design model. And it needs to be supported by machines, but it still needs humans to drive it.
That intelligent enterprise framework into the businesses then, moving it forward that way.
Yeah.
No, good. I like what you've got to say about like your point, like AI success is only 10% algorithms, 20% data and technology, and 70% reinventing how people work. What does that reinvention of work look like day to day?
I'll give you a couple of examples. So I was working with a Romanian retailer called Profi, and we wanted to do a rebranding exercise in wine. We wanted to get more market share. And typically the way you would do that in the old world is you go to a Havas, a WP, an advertising agency, a brand agency, and then they said 8 to 12 weeks to basically do a rebranding exercise for you. We did it in a week. And we did it basically getting digital marketing people. We call it a hot house, a hackathon, call it what you will. And We got ChatGPT at the time, 3.5. We got the people in the room, 2 days prompting away, and we ended up with 100 different brand names, one of which was Crama
Yes.
Semelior, which basically means country wine cellar in Romanian. Next 2 days, we got Mid-Journey because we didn't have the integrated design option, but we got design options, and we ended up with 10 new different brand logos, brand designs, like bits and pieces of all of them, but not quite the one. Day 5, we brought in a professional graphic designer who took the output from Mid-Journey. We paid them $2,000. We got the result. Within 8 weeks, we'd rolled it across 1,500 stores, and within 3 months, we'd increased our market share 3 points. So we
Yeah.
compressed that. There's still humans. Humans made it all work. It was still marketeers, and we got some third-party support, but we just really dramatically streamlined the activity. I mentioned earlier the contact center situation where sadly
Hmm.
many of them have been dehumanized, but you've got great companies like Octopus Energy and others who are using the technology now to start to build that corpus of knowledge and train agents that can handle 80% of your day-to-day calls, but leave humans doing what I call a VIP types customer service, and actually they get a higher quality of work. They deliver they've got a higher quality of interaction.
Yeah.
They're not as pressured, oh, you've got to do this call in 5 minutes. I'll then give you a third example. So I've just been doing a project in Germany with basically, I call it Specsavers but in
Okay.
Germany, a company called Artemis Augenklinik. Now they do opticians, but they also do laser surgery, glaucoma. Your typical optician in Germany sees 6 patients an hour. By introducing AI, a modern natural language processing AI, speech recognition, what you can do is you can capture all of their conversation, and actually you can also shield out any of the personal stuff. You can just
Yeah.
focus on the medical pieces, document that precisely, and then automate that into your system. And suddenly,
Hmm.
your average doctor can see 10 patients an hour. Now, in Germany, as an example, there's a shortage of eye doctors.
Yeah.
Most of them have got a backlog of patients. The improved productivity can go straight to the bottom line because they can all suddenly see 20-30% more patients and dramatically improve your profitability straight out of the box. So you actually give a better customer experience. Your doctor has a better experience
Yeah.
because they're not doing a lot of administration, and you generate more revenue in the process because you see more. So those are things where generally you're looking at efficiencies, but actually you can say if you can see more patients, generate more revenue, you can actually generate better output and you
Definitely.
get a better result. And then you put that on the flip side. I'll give you a negative example. For 40 years in the UK, we've had a fully
Yeah.
automated railway called the Docklands Light Railway. Did you know that the Jubilee line and the Victoria line in the
Okay.
60s were designed to be automated? And we still have a paradox of paying train drivers 100,000 a year to basically do what is basically a machine can do better. And I think the honest, cruel reality is somebody has to say to the train drivers, I'm sorry, it's more dangerous having a human driving that train, and it's much easier,
Yeah.
simpler to basically automate it. So this is my paradox to say if you can't get trains to be fully automated, how the hell are you going to do everything else? And actually, it's an easy use case. And who's going to complain about a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand train drivers who earn 100 grand a year being made redundant?
Hmm.
Only the train
Yeah.
drivers, I think, is my opinion. So you've got to look at it and say because a lot of this, as I came back to, is we'll do this at home,
Yeah.
but we've got massive
Definitely.
resistance in business. And unless we start looking at this as
Mhm.
an opportunity rather than a threat, the impact on the
Yeah.
UK
I get
economy
it.
could be catastrophic.
I was just thinking you were talking about like opticians there. One of my good friends, he's got a franchise for 2 stores with a well-known optician in the UK. But
Yeah,
even some of the stuff he was talking about, not so much the stuff what you were talking about, but he was looking at some really like rare kind of conditions, and he just wasn't 100% sure, and he was fascinated by some of the inputs he was putting into AI to and the answer it come back on and the detail and just to kind of help him with diagnosis as well.
that's one of my. I think I've probably told this story again, but yeah, I've done a lot of work in healthcare. Again, come back to yeah,
Yeah,
where's the opportunity and challenges? I'd say in the UK, NHS Scotland, NHS Wales, NHS England, the general practitioner doctor
yeah,
is technically functionally redundant. Now, I'm not saying we should replace them all overnight, but since COVID, it's been very difficult to see one. Typically, I don't know about your experience, but when I been to a GP, I
yeah,
typically see a nurse practitioner. Did you know that the best rated GP surgery in the UK is in London, doesn't have any GPs. It's staffed by master degree qualified nurse practitioners. They give you the TLC because they've got a master degree, they can refer and prescribe. And then you look at the AI equation, which is you find that because a lot of people have comorbidities, they're actually got more than one thing wrong, especially the elderly. The average GP is slightly better than you or me with Google at diagnosing them. But give them an AI and their diagnostic capabilities. And actually, when you actually look at the research, the doctors have a lot of resistance to what the AI is saying. Give it to a nurse practitioner, and they will get to a better answer. So they'll give you the TLC, they'll give you the prescription, and they give you a better diagnosis, which could free up a lot of doctors to do other things about prevention, more specialisms, and you can pay those nurse practitioners more money, and actually there's a huge amount of opportunity. But those are the kind of opportunities, but also threats. People say, I don't want to get rid of my GP, but actually.
All right, we'll move on from that, and we'll talk about some of the kind of lessons from transformation. And you've worked in some fascinating case studies, as you've mentioned, from Profi's transformation in retail to Cargus in logistics, Gina Maria in healthcare, and Telefonica O2 in telecoms. Which of these projects best illustrates the power of AI when it's built into the business model?
I think the healthcare ones are really good examples because it is. I started with Regina Maria, which is a hospital system in Romania, and then I've taken, as I said, to Optegra in the UK, and then Artemis in Germany. But Regina Maria, if honestly speaking, if you needed an operation or something, I would recommend going to. They'll speak English, candidly, but there's a subscription service. What they'd done, and by the time I arrived, they were doing some great work in terms of automating all the patient onboarding, all the things I've talked about in terms of chatbots, but before ChatGPT, doing good ones. So they have an agent called Maria, which basically handles patient onboarding, but also patient payments and follow-up and net promoter score. And then they started to look at, and that's my research from 3 years ago, was they started to look at the GP situation because the CEO there was basically looking at saying, how can we get our doctors to start to adopt this? And we got into this kind of change management thing, which is saying, well, you're actually a private service, so basically you want to have the best doctors with the best service. Sometimes you might have to be black and white with the doctor and just say, look, we're going to pay you a premium, but you're going to use the AI. If you don't want to use the AI, go and practice somewhere else. But we want to offer the best service. Now, Regina Maria, you look at the benchmarks in healthcare, they've just been sold to a Finnish Meilainen, which is one of the highest rated healthcare businesses in the world. Regina Maria is about a quarter of the price of Meilainen and a tenth of the price of the best you get in America. But they're as good as the best you get in America, the best you get in Europe. And far better than you might get from Bupa. And I won't say what they were thinking about the NHS, apart from the fact they don't do accident and emergency. The quality of care is, and it is looking at it's all those things, all the things that take you away from the customer care bit. They make that more efficient, more effective. They make the patient experience better, the doctor experience better, and it actually runs with a better quality output. And I think that's got to be the dream ticket of where you can see AI. You see all the things we hate doing, AI can help. There's some of the things we like doing, probably AI can do better than we can. But you get to go make a happy balance. But I see in every industry. So I mentioned telecom until relatively recently. The billions that were spent on telecoms networks in the UK was radio engineering powered by Excel. Now they've worked out it's an AI problem because you get the cell towers in the right place and optimize them for 5G services because it's hideously expensive. But before it literally was Excel spreadsheets and when you say talking about servicing customers across lots of different channels, and candidly, you got the things which humans definitely can't do. So those are the easy things to probably look at. When a human can't do it, it's an easy sell. The pain is obviously when the humans have been used to doing it, but frankly, if you can get a better outcome, keep the humans in the loop, which I think is critical, give a better customer experience, a better experience for me as an employee, that's a win-win.
I was going to start talking about a few different examples there, but we could be sitting here talking about these all night. It's all day. It's fascinating. But I think exit some of these cases, like transformations you've been working on, like exit valuations in those cases were up by hundreds of millions. For any leaders listening today, what's the key lessons they should take away from these examples?
I mentioned Profi, a retailer, right? So the history
Mm.
there was it's Romania,
Yeah.
which is still an emerging economy. They were at the cutting edge. Mid Europa, with the private equity I worked for at the time, they'd bought actually Profi in 2010 with then 50 stores, and by 2018, 2019, they had 1,500. Now they've got 2,000. They put a lot of investment into refitting those stores to Western European standards. So if you go into Bucharest or Timișoara, a Romanian city, you go into a Profi store, it looks and feels pretty much like a Tesco or a Sainsbury's, and probably not a Lidl. It feels like a kind of modern,
Yeah.
high quality store. They then set out about doing digitization and AI with McKinsey and Quantum Black. It fell out with them
Yeah.
badly, and then unfortunately COVID arrived. And I was parachuted in 2022 because Mid Europa were trying to offload the business and nobody wanted to touch it because
Mm.
like you've got expensive looking stores and no digital. The reality is it had some digital. What I learned from that, and it kind of I was working with the C-suite. 2 or 3 of them were ex
Yeah.
general managers from Tesco, but in Europe. The lesson I take from that was that the guys were telling me about saying, well, I'm running Tesco Poland. I get some great stuff from Welling Garden City. I go back and present every quarter, every 6 months, and they say, I want to make this investment. It's like, can you come back with another feasibility study in 3 months? Can you come back with another proof of concept in another 6 months? Can you give us another pilot?
Yeah.
And just I want to
Get
get some
moving.
shit done. The all there's just resistance to investment, and in Profi they just get and that was the whole point. They adopted digital and AI. We got the thing,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of capabilities. I mentioned the rebranding. We got Azure AI. We basically turbocharged the app with menus. So basically, instead of just doing individual things, you pick
Yeah.
up with a bit of AI. What's the customer buying? Right. Okay. They regularly buy these 3 or 4 things. All right. Well, let's offer them a menu of something to make with. Here's 10 things. We'll offer a discount on 2 or 3 of them. Within 3 months, we're upping the basket size by 50%. And then we get, because they like the menus, it's like, oh, we get repeat purchases up by 50%. People are starting to use the app, and with it, a year later, a business that couldn't be sold is then off. We've agreed a sale to Ahold, the large Dutch retailer, and it's been driven on a
Yeah.
growth and agile business model, and I think it's the confidence of a business to do things and drive growth as opposed to just cut costs. Which that's
Yeah.
that's my let's say key recommendation is business has got to be about taking risks, and what we can do with data and AI is give you confidence to take more risks with confidence that if there's always going to be a plan B, a plan C out there. You have to be prepared. The fact
Yeah.
is, it's not going to be plan A all the way through, but you've got to be prepared to adapt. And what I think is
Yeah.
increasingly evident in the literature from academics and the McKinsey's et al. Is that the biggest challenges
Yeah.
faced is at the top of the shop. And unless you really know where you're going to be differentiated, I mean, again, you put a mirror up. I don't need to mention any particular companies. Look at our somewhat struggling
Yeah.
UK. They've given us lots of missions, lots of pillars, lots of foundations, but there is clearly no strategy. And then you end up with, which it's not just a Labour thing. It could be Conservatives, could be NP. That all power sits then with the Treasury or the Finance Minister, who just says, right, okay, we can't afford it. We have to cut that, or we're going to
Yeah.
have to spend and get more tax in. But actually, we're not delivering anything in terms of quality of service. And you put a mirror up to that, and unfortunately, a lot of our companies look pretty similar. They've lost the ability to drive growth because I think they've lost the confidence that things are moving too fast for a human's instinct. And you've got to get that data and AI into your DNA to say, I can work faster, I can make more decisions. The great thing with private equity, there's a lot of downsides. We've seen some of the challenges of private equity when it's done badly, when good things go bad, like in the water sector. But in the main, they want results. They want things. They want you to get stuff done in 12 months or less. They want to drive a value. Everything's about a value creation. Yes, there'll still be some cost things, but what private equity have realized, and from the bad side, they've realized a lot of these investments are on their second or third buyers. There isn't easy financial juice to squeeze out. Basically, you've got to invest in things that are going to drive growth to move things forward. And they see digital and AI as being a way to do that, but they want it at pace. So they want the 1 week initiatives, the 3 month initiatives. They don't want the 3 to 5 year
No.
SAP or Salesforce transformations that we used to do in the 90s and 2000s. It's got to be
Yeah. I've been
weeks
working
and
on
months, not years.
some searches for the head of AI leadership positions at the moment in the UK with kind of PA-backed businesses, and I think there's a real opportunity for leaders like yourself and real technical AI kind of business people as well who can work at that pace and can demonstrate going into a business and really moving things forward at pace as well. Exciting times.
the challenge you get with a lot of the companies that I find is people did this in the dot-com era and with digital. There's like saying, all right, we'll need to get somebody from Google or Meta or Amazon who's done this before. But the reality is like oil and water. Those people coming into a Tesco or a NatWest, RBS or similar, it just your culture, your behavior, you don't operate at the speed they want. They do move fast and break things, and actually it doesn't always work. So you can have all the best PhDs, actually they're probably best working at the metas or in startups. What you need is that hybrid person who can take people on a journey. And that's why I say come back to data and AI working together. Why do people always like an Excel spreadsheet? Because anybody can create a chart in 10 minutes from some data. So you've got to show people, I say, paint this long-term vision of what could happen, but then take them on a journey of showing them stuff every few weeks. And that will elicit more requirements. Can we do this? Can we do that? And if you've got the expert saying, well, actually, yeah, but that's going to take 6 months. We can do that in 3 months for 100K. That's going to take us 3 years and cost you 5 million.
Okay, Eddie. So covered quite a lot so far here, but maybe looking a little bit about like practical advice and looking forward for people, for the audience. And what's the biggest mistake companies making when it comes to AI strategy?
My kids and everybody's
Yeah,
using ChatGPT and Gemini at home. What's the easy option for our CTO,
yeah,
CIO? Right, we'll implement Copilot from Microsoft.
yeah,
And it's not a criticism of Microsoft. It's just it looks good in theory, but then great, we can all record our meetings and we can get them transcribed, but it's a horizontal, and the
yeah,
productivity is just dissipated. You've got to solve business problems, and then so when you start to look at business problems, people still think in old terms things. I want a
yeah,
use case. I want a specific, and actually you've probably got to think differently about how people work and not just think about an individual micro thing. You got to think system thinking to look at how best, and look at how humans and AI can work. And don't just be like we have with every technology, obsessed by the latest generative AI models. There's so much still value to be squeezed out with natural language processing, machine learning, etc. You've got to think about multiple styles of AI, think about their strategy. And again, I look at in lessons for data folks in this world, there's like say, great AI needs great data, and actually great AI needs a lot of data.
mm-hmm,
Going back to Google search of 30 years ago, your average is not based on great data. These neural networks don't need
yeah,
great data to actually start to give you results. So don't
yeah,
get paranoid about I need perfect data. You need great data for machine learning, but for generative, you need data, and you start need to think about improving it, but you should improve it in along with
yeah,
looking at the models, as opposed to I need perfection before I can get
yeah. There
results.
is.
So there is a yin and yang. The data folks again are having to wake up to the fact, which I was in 20 years ago at Capgemini. You've got this structured data and unstructured data, and there's so much in video, audio, documents. Yeah, your
Yeah,
perfect world, your world garden of your data warehouse, your data lake, your data lake house. When you bring in all that unstructured stuff, it's big and ugly, and it requires different taxonomies and different thinking, and those are important things. And ultimately, I think you need to get
mm-hmm,
the CEO on board. What I found, I think the number one lesson is where this is heading. This is existential,
yep,
certainly for some organizations. This is not something a CEO can delegate to a
mm-hmm,
CTO or even a chief AI officer. It's got to be one of their top three priorities. They've got to sponsor it. Clearly, they've got to run the business. They can't spend. They do
yeah,
need an executive or a leader who is running it. They're going to be accountable for it, and they've got to be actively engaged in it, because it is about changing the way
yeah.
the organization works and thinks. And then you look at the people bit.
Good.
We could have an entire podcast about the HR function, the CHROs. These guys have got to wake up and smell the coffee big time, because you're fundamentally changing the way people and talent. You've got to recognize that actually a lot of your best talent is probably not going to be your employees. Some of your best talent is going to be employees, but you're going to have contractors. The best people in tech, the best people in AI probably don't want to work for you, but maybe they'll work for you fractionally, or you can bring them as consultants or advisors. But you've got to build that relationship and realize that the skills that you need in leadership around change as usual, not business. A lot of the people who were great in the old
Definitely.
world are not necessarily the people. You don't necessarily need Mark
Mm-hmm,
Zuckerberg move fast and break things and upset lots of people, but you're going to need
yeah,
more more change agents. And so that kind of top of the shop
That's changing,
leadership thing, I think, is
100%.
key.
There's so much noise out there as well from people. I know what you were mentioning there about
Yeah,
that the data has to be clean and you have to have this and that. Like part of a person within a leadership position and these businesses, they're getting sold to daily and getting told that really, look, if you don't buy this, you can't do that, and if you've got this, that won't work here. So I suppose it's really cutting through that noise as well. That's a key probably skill to be able to go into a job like that. All right, Eddie.
yeah.
So if you were advising a CEO tomorrow and future proofing their business with AI, what three things would you tell them to do first?
I think the key thing, Michael, I touched on it with examples, is you've got to work out strategically what capabilities are going to allow you to win in the market. Because then you apply AI to supercharge. So you've got to understand what your capabilities are. Secondly, I think there is a huge amount in your back office that you can bring to AI. Where if you've dehumanized your contact centers, I give that world a bad example, but a lot of your kind of BPO, ITO, offshoring, when you bring in agents, you can look at basically, I would say, and particularly the protecting the IP and securing, I would call it high quality onshore jobs. A lot of that offshore, nearshore can be automated. And actually you can still do it and you can do it cheaper. So there's big opportunities, I think, in terms of not making people in say there's a big message for like say UK or onshore is got to protect and improve the quality of jobs onshore, but
Yeah.
and you're probably going to lose a lot of offshore type work. So identify that. But ultimately, it's then looking at what leadership skills do me and my team need to make this work, because we are going to be looking at reskilling and
Yep.
reshaping the organization. As I said, putting AI into our DNA. So it starts at the top. What skills do I need? I don't necessarily need to be a guru in prompting. I don't necessarily need to go and do a Harvard school in data science or Python. But basically, what skills do I need to lead this, to make this happen? And
Yeah.
what do my leaders need? And we want to look at the organization. So as I say, focus, get somebody focused on the 10%, but make sure your focus as a CEO is on the 70% is basically how are we going to make this organization work
Yeah.
differently and
And
with AI in
disrupt
its
all about
DNA.
that. And you also talk about designing for 2030, not 2000. What do you think the companies who get AI right will look like in 5 years compared to those who don't? I know you've said they'll be.
I think they'll look very differently. You'll still have CFOs and CFOs, but you probably have much more flexible organizational structures. You're looking at more dynamic capabilities in the organization. And yeah, they're really clear. You'd say, what do we need to be good at? What are the things that we're actually either outsourcing or using AI
Yeah.
because that's better than the humans. But frankly, we've got to a much more static, happy, evolving place of a mixture of human
Yeah.
intelligence and machine intelligence. So there will be, I would call
Hmm.
it probably more entrepreneurial and say more agile in terms of, and they're not so monolithic in terms of
Yeah,
their
definitely.
processes and
And we
organizations.
can't ignore ethics. How should the leaders balance the push for innovation with the need for responsible and trustworthy AI?
I think it's all about doing the right things, and it's always been about doing the right things. So it's saying the, as I call it, risk and performance, two sides of the same data. You look at a bank, they say they have their first line, second line, third line of defense, and they're all working in parallel universes. But the reality is, it's the same data. The data you need to sell to somebody is the same data you need to report to regulators that you've been selling to them successfully. And actually, the same models you might need to have service different stakeholders. So I think
Yeah.
it's doing the right things right. You look at sustainability, for example. I always say to people, planet, and profit. Unfortunately for the people and
Yeah.
planet people, you've got to have profit, but you can have profit and you can have people and planet. And actually, when you look at the data, you look at
Yeah.
sustainability, very hot topic with data centers, carbon, water, electricity to drive those. Well, actually, you've got to be more efficient about how you're orchestrating that, because that's going to drive your performance. So we will have to look at, there are going to be a lot of bad actors, but I think we've just got to be less tolerant of them, and call it out more, as opposed to just accepting that these things happen. Yeah, but it is, I think, being transparent, the reality is AI models, and particularly the big ones, are biased based on their training data. And if their training data is the entire internet, they tend to be more biased. So
Yeah, no, ideal. Not really touched on culture, but if you were in a business as an AI leader and somebody was really pushing this forward, how would you bring people on the AI journey with you? Maybe if there's a lot of people in an organisation who are really skeptical or fearful.
I think you've got to say there's to be a lot of, I would call it carrot and stick. You've got to basically, there's got to be lots of opportunities for people. And I think it's saying where it comes from the tone at the top and the leadership. It's like, what do we want people to do, and what opportunities do we want to create from them? And you have to accept that there will be things that people think they like doing or take for granted that they do today that they won't be doing. But that's been the story of technology, as I said, since the Industrial Revolution. It's just the pace. So, but I think the opportunities could be great and substantial and massive. And so I think we've got to take people on that journey, show them what they could do, show them how the experience could be better. And that's the way it has to be.
Where can people find you if people want to kind of connect with you or hear about what you're doing or get in touch? Where's the best place to find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Eddie S on LinkedIn, or you can find me at eddie.short@velesconsulting.co.uk. That's I'm always open to direct messages and consultations, and you'll see me posting quite a lot on LinkedIn. I'm sharing my ideas and thoughts, and I'm trying to be as provocative as you can without being as too negative from the social media. But I find you have to be provocative. So find me there, and I'm happy to talk and happy to help organizations.
For myself, I reached out to you once and we ended up talking and I had you up at my round table and all that. So it's been good, really enjoying it. Okay, I think we've covered a lot here, so I'm really looking forward to this one. But brilliant, Eddie. Thanks very much. Thanks for sharing your insight and experience and for showing us why AI has to be built in, not bolted on. And for listeners, thanks for tuning in. Stay with us for more conversations in leadership, innovation, and how to build truly future-ready organisation. Thanks very much, Eddie. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks for listening to A Class Act. If you've enjoyed the episode, make sure to follow the show so you never miss a conversation. And if you're building a data team or making a key leadership hire, reach out to us at MBN Solution using the link in the show notes.